So, I know there's a tendency to mark game updates for Battlefield as, the biggest yet, or the most impactful yet here in the community, especially among us content creators. I know that I, in particular, have been very guilty of that to date, but in fairness, DICE are also on a bit of a hot streak right now in regards to, fixing some serious underlying issues with Battlefield 6 right now. The next thing in their sights is Gunplay, and a couple of days ago, DICE lifted the veil on everything that we can expect to see changed regarding Gunplay in next week's 1.3.3.0 game update, with a very, very detailed breakdown from senior producer David Serland and principal game designer Florian. The patch notes also dropped today, but I'm not going to go through those line by line. I just want to focus on the overarching changes that are being made here, and then we'll save the more nitty and the gritty for, when the patch actually drops next week. So grab a snack, grab a bevy. We've got a lot to unpack today, guys. Let's get straight into it. DICE kicked off by acknowledging that they've been hearing our feedback loud and clear in regards to how the gunplay in Battlefield 6 right now feels a touch shallow and at times a bit cheap in how it rewards precision. They also acknowledged that some of their recent balance passes and forays into making the gunplay feel a bit less laser beamy have missed the mark entirely and have had the adverse effect of making gunplay feel less intuitive to work with overall. So with this next update, DICE are taking a bunch of the random horizontal recoil variation that exists on full auto weapons today completely out of the mix and are making horizontal recoil patterns on a lot of guns feel more consistent overall. To give us an idea of how this is going to look, DICE provided us a before and after of what this looks like in action on the SOR 556 assault rifle, which, granted, is one of the easiest weapons to control in the game, so I'm not sure if this was the best example to draw on. I would have preferred to have seen something like the VCR2 or something like that, but nonetheless, it does demonstrate these changes in action and shows a much more consistent trend and pull to the right, with less random instances of deviation to the left. And if this was going to be the trend that we see on most weapons in the game, which based on the patch notes looks to be the case, that's actually stellar in my opinion. I think we can all agree that the bump in random horizontal recoil that we saw a couple of updates ago really gutted the viability of a fair few guns in the game, and while it did have the benefit of making the game feel less laser beamy, because it was becoming a problem at one point, it did make a lot of the guns feel muddy to use by comparison, which isn't the answer. Adding some consistency back to the recoil patterns in the game is going to go a long way in reintroducing some mastery back into the equation, especially when you put that change against one of the other really important changes coming in this update as well. DICE are also taking the opportunity to increase bullet deviation, bloom, or spread, whatever you want to call it, after the first shot on automatic weapons to place more of an emphasis back onto tap and burst firing at longer ranges, which, long and short of it, basically returns the Battlefield gunplay back to something that is more in line with what we saw in Battlefields 3 and 4, where recoil was consistent and somewhat easy to master with practice, but the real test of your mastery was your ability to burst automatic weapons at the perfect interval to extend out effective ranges where you needed to. And I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys here, this is the right way forward. No ifs and or buts about it. Spread and managing your spread has always been an integral part of the Battlefield gunplay ecosystem for a very long time, and the best Battlefield games have always featured and leaned into it. It's a very intuitive means of limiting weaponry effective range while not relying on random visual or horizontal recoil to achieve that. And no matter what some will say, spread is actually a very easy mechanic to wrap your head around after some practice and training on your muscle memory to burst at longer ranges with the weapon in question, rather than just, holding down the trigger and hoping for the best. Seeing DICE take this approach and looking to re-inject some more of this, critical element back into Battlefield's gunplay is a big breath of fresh air for me, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Another change we can expect to see in this update to gunplay in regards to long-range combat is DICE making some changes and tunes to weapon muzzle velocity and drag values to add a bit more of a skill curve to tracking moving targets at longer ranges. Basically, it's going to require you to lead your targets more to hit them as the ranges extend out, which I also think is a great step here. I don't know about you guys, but it's always felt way too easy to just beam moving targets at ranges in this game, especially with the likes of, say, the KTS 100, the SOR 556, or even the L85, right? Any real long-range dominant weapon, especially if you go ahead and mount an extended barrel on them, they reached muzzle velocities of 1,000 meters plus, which just made it so damn easy to hit long-range targets that were moving perpendicular to you. It just didn't feel like there was much in the way of depth there. This is also being applied to snipers as well. Don't get me started, guys. 9 times out of 10, you can just point at the target in question with a sniper and have the round connect at long range, which also differs greatly from previous Battlefield games, which required a lot of lead and anticipation of moving targets at range. So again, seeing stuff like this get some attention is great news to me. Just a real quick tangent on snipers as well. DICE are also tuning sniper sweet spots to be far narrower in their application across the entire arsenal. In all cases, basically halving the effective distance of the sweet spot mechanic per sniper rifle that uses it, so not the mini scout in this case. For example, in the case of the M2010 ESR, its sweet spot range is moving from 75 to 100 meters to 75 to 100 meters. The SV98 from 54 to 90 meters to 54 to 75 meters. You get the idea. Now, I'll be honest in saying that I think the sweet spot mechanic should actually be yeeted from the game entirely, as I really don't think it adds any value to the Battlefield gunplay environment outside of just simply making sniping easier than it should be. But it's clear that DICE want to use this as a balancing mechanic, and I think this is the closest we'll actually get to DICE admitting that there is a problem with the mechanic in the game. It's just nice to see that this troublesome mechanic is going to be abused a little bit less often, in my view. Anyway, considering all of this in aggregate, guys, it actually all feeds into what I think might be the most impactful change of this whole update that we haven't even started talking about yet. That being the introduction of limb multipliers to the Battlefield 6 damage ecosystem. For context, guys, right now in Battlefield 6, if you hit someone anywhere on the body with the exception of the head, you are landing a 1.0 times damage multiplier, which means that your damage is advertised as normal. This goes for, hitting someone's center mass, all the way down to hitting the smallest pixel of their pinky toe, which can obviously feel a bit cheap from time to time, and didn't exactly go any ways to rewarding precision in you engaging your targets. You could aim literally anywhere and net the same optimal TTK reward. So the solution here for DICE was to introduce limb multipliers to most weapons in the game as a means to reward precision while somewhat punishing poor accuracy with below optimal time to kills. Now, to explain the thinking a little bit further here, they did take a quick moment to unpack why they went down this route rather than a flat reduction of time to kill across the board. Time to kill has obviously been a bit of a hot topic in Battlefield 6 here, and a lot of people have just been simply requesting a straight up bullet to kill increase across the entire game's arsenal. And I actually think it's important to highlight DICE's thinking here because I've also got some thoughts on it. The time to kill benchmark for Battlefield 6 runs between 200 milliseconds and 300 milliseconds, with some outliers such as the SCW-10, SG553R, and the TR7, which hold a more hit and run style playstyle. To DICE, it's key to maintain this kind of TTK to give players more opportunity to win in scenarios where they're outnumbered, such as, 2v1s, 3v1s, whatever the case may be, where dispatching the first unaware target quickly is key to successfully hitting the next target, so on and so forth. DICE's main concern by increasing the best case scenario time to kill across the board to, say, 300 to 400 milliseconds is that players would lose out on flanking opportunities that are key to Battlefield. Now, as someone who used to play a game called PlanetSide 2 as an example, which was a massive scale game which featured an average baseline time to kill of 400 to 500 milliseconds in close quarters, where you did have to go on some serious multi-kill streaks to make a dent in an enemy's front line. This is not logic from DICE that I entirely track, because if everyone's rocking the same new benchmark time to kill, then the playing field is still somewhat even, and the opportunity is still there to leverage that best case scenario time to kill to go on streaks. The only difference is that it just takes slightly longer. Now, in the case of PlanetSide, and this is why it's a slightly unfair comparison to make, is that headshots were a 2 times damage multiplier across the board in that game. And I do doubt that we're ever going to see DICE take that approach here, so I can understand the reservations to make sweeping time to kill changes, especially after what happened in Battlefield 5's life cycle. So, as that middle ground, and as we said before, DICE are making limb multipliers a factor now as a means to elongate the time to kill in the game for any cases of poor accuracy or out of place shooting. All weapon categories bar shotguns guns and sidearms now have limb multipliers that typically increase the shot to kill on a full health target by 1 bullet should you hit an area with a limb multiplier associated with it. Snipers are getting hit the hardest of this change with a drop to a 0.67 times multiplier when you hit the legs, abdomen, or arms on an enemy player. This is reduced from 0.8 times in the current build of the game. DMRs are impacted less so. Their damage multipliers now sit at 0.91 times for hits against arms, the abdomen, or legs, with their headshot damage multipliers remaining completely unchanged. Where things are getting very interesting though, and I think where we'll see the biggest impacts to the overall feeling of the game, is in the case of full auto weapons. From here on out, my friends, automatic weapons are now going to be getting impacted by a 0.84 times damage multiplier to the arms, abdomen, and legs. But on top of that, we're also seeing a headshot damage increase across the board, with standard headshots now hitting at a 1.40 times multiplier, hollow points hitting at 1.57 times, and synthetic hitting at 1.80 times. Now, I haven't done the maths across the board yet to identify whether or not this is actually going to lead to a material jump for any of the damage tiers in the game in regards to whether or not this leads to a, material impact on bullet to kill thresholds for headshots. But you best believe that I'll be quick to do some testing and get that video out for you ASAP as soon as this patch hits. And I gotta hand it to DICE here, guys. I think this is actually a very intuitive middle ground for what they are seeking to achieve here. I think, especially alongside the changes to spread in particular, this is going to inject a stronger sense of skill curve and depth to Battlefield 6's gunplay. It places a hefty reliance on not only the initial shot placement and your ability to make sure that your initial shot is going to a place where it's going to deal full damage, but it also places a greater onus on your ability to keep your shots well placed during a burst as well for the engagement range that you're at. Being sloppy with your accuracy and hitting people in the legs and the arms is no longer going to produce the best case scenario results that we've been seeing in the game to date. And once again now, the onus is on the player to ensure that they are hitting shots in areas that would translate to the optimal damage. And that kind of depth is something that the Battlefield gunplay loop has been sorely missing. I've always believed, ever since I first got my hands on the game back in early 2025 in Melbourne, that the core gunplay of the game was strong and that there was certainly some, good bones behind it that could lead to a really good system. All of these fine-tune improvements all lead to just, adding some depth to those core bones that I played way back when. Has it taken longer than I would have liked to have seen? You betcha, but I'm glad it's finally coming. On a side note as well, I actually think that the video that DICE had done here in regards to, explaining the changes, getting Florian and Serland on the bloody camera and explaining this shit in a high amount of detail, this is the kind of stuff the community I think wants to see. It was a real breath of fresh air to see two core developers of the game get on camera and actually walk through showing before and after comparisons of what they're changing. So to the team at Battlefield, seriously, keep this kind of comm up, because it goes a long way, I think, in adding a little bit more in the way of just community confidence in the direction of the game and, shows us what the guys are doing in great detail. It takes away a lot of the ambiguity, especially the ambiguity that we were seeing from some of the patch notes at the start of the game's life cycle. Anyway, folks, that is everything I've got for today. Obviously, when the patch hits next week, we will be boots on the ground, testing it immediately as it drops. So be sure to get subscribed to the channel and follow me on my Twitch channel for my live first impressions of that next week. We'll be doing a ton of content, and weapon reviews will be kicking back up as soon as the changes go live. So make sure you're also subscribed for that. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the changes, guys. As always, very, very keen to hear thoughts down below. But until next time, guys, stay safe, stay well, look after yourselves and each other, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace, guys. Have a good one.